This is an information item. And included in your packet is a memo with each of the requests and the commitments we received from them, which I will be speaking to. To begin, however, I just wanted to go over what the local funding request process looks like. So in the spring, we send out a letter from the CEO describing what the process looks like, what VRT has accomplished. It's a bit of an introductory letter. Then in May, we send out those funding requests to our partners so that they can see what we will be asking of them in the upcoming fiscal year. In June, we meet with council members or committees based on requests from those councils or committees. In August, those councils or committees move through their final budget decisions. That's the same time the VRT goes through its final budget adoption process. And then in September and October, VRT works with each of our funding partners to finalize our cooperative agreements, which then pave the way for any invoicing. The invoicing is determined by that cooperative agreement, and some of it is all upfront, some of it is done throughout the year. Again, those are details that defined in the cooperative agreement. So as shown in your packet, there were two tables, one for Ada County and one for Canyon County. And this is just the table from Ada County. And you can see that of our funding requests, of all of our Ada County partners, we received our request from everyone but Ada County and the City of Star. Ada County was short the $29,000, and the City of Star at this point has determined not to fund VRT's request. And then in Canyon County, there were a few more folks that were not able to meet VRT's request, including Canyon County was the largest single difference there. A number of the smaller cities, Notice, Parma, Wilder, and a few of the Canyon County highway districts also did not meet VRT's funding request. So between Ada and Canyon County, there's $128,000 that we'd requested in local funds that we are not expecting to receive. So what that means for us is, as you all know, VRT's funding requests are voluntary. There isn't a mechanism for us to require those requests when we make them. And so we go through our budgeting process. We make those requests. They go through their budgeting process at the same time. When we come out of it, we have to adjust our budget to match what our revenues are. Any shortfalls would result in either postponing or downsizing projects or cutting service. Those are typically the levers that we have left at this point to address any funding shortfall, or continued conversations with our funding partners. I suppose that's the other thing that we've done in the past is, as the year progresses, we continue those discussions with our funding partners. And that was what I had prepared for discussion. So, Mr. Chair, I would turn it back to you and the committee for any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments from anyone regarding the funding?
Mr. Chair, could I comment? Just also set the stage a little bit. So, Stephen, you left Eagle's shortfall off.
Well,
back one, yeah. So the City of Eagle, we originally requested enough money to cover the on-demand system. You may all have heard that they made a decision not to fund on-demand this year for a variety of reasons. One, they weren't comfortable that the ridership was where it should be for the cost, and two, they made a budget decision not to increase their budget amount, the allowed 3%, and without that increase in budget authority, they didn't frankly have enough money to fund everything that was on their plate. So We then held a public hearing in Eagle about the on-demand a little after the fact because they were not in good communication with us, frankly. And ultimately then took to the board a recommendation to discontinue the on-demand, which the board accepted a week ago, and that on-demand system will be discontinued on October 1st. The other thing I would note is Ada County has traditionally been about twice that much short in their commitment. We've been having conversations with them and will continue to have conversations about the value that our services bring both to their various service centers in the county and also the fact that we have discounted enclaves that are fully surrounded by city areas and added those costs in the cost allocation methodology to the city that surrounds it. We're rethinking that. So like I said, we're just having ongoing conversations with Ada County about the value of those services. They've responded this year with about another 30,000 more than what they have in the last most recent history contributed to us. And then if you go to Canyon County, well, and then Star, City of Star is one of those cities that's been hardest hit by the changes in state law, House Bill 389, which limits the amount of growth in a city's budget to 8%, regardless of how much they have actually grown. City of Star has consistently outpaced that 8% and has had their budget limited to much less than the amount of new growth that they've actually been absorbing. That's been 3 years on now, and they also are in just a very difficult budget situation. And so, as I understand their conversation, that was the main issue with why they decided not to serve, not that they to contribute, not that they weren't happy with what we provided. And then if you go to Canyon County, City of Middleton did contribute this year, and they have not for many years. So that was I think a good positive indication that they understand that as contributing members were more able to work with them to do planning for how we might serve them better. The smallest cities still are not contributing for the in large major. Many of them do get serviced with Beyond Access, so I think we have continuing opportunities to work with them to show them the value of our services. But again, that's an ongoing conversation. Lastly, I'd say we are starting a larger conversation with City of Garden City to see if there's a way that we can work with them and certain partners in the city for them to begin contributing more. They're certainly getting much more value than what they're contributing today. And secondly, we're starting a larger conversation with our partners who will ultimately be served by Micron service if we do serve Micron about how to approach that. So it's historically not, this organization has never gotten all of the requests that they've made. So actually, if you look at everything we requested and the shortfall, it's relatively small.
About 1%. If I may follow up, Elaine,
Yeah.
the 37,999 requested of Eagle, if they did fund, that 37,999 did not include the on-demand money, apparently.
No, it did not.
So had it shown that, then there would have been a negative number in the difference.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I had prepared these after we had made that decision to cut the 150, and so I did not include the original request, which was 900 or not 900, 90,000 or right at 100,000. And we, based on the actions that the board had taken in terms of removing the 150, that's the reason that I didn't put that original
Okay,
FY25 request in there. But yes, that's an example where we had initially put out a request and then they came back and we had to make some changes, including cutting service to make it balance.
is the same true for Caldwell?
The city of Caldwell, we had originally, okay, Mr. Chair, yes, in the sense that the city, we had originally requested a larger amount of the city of Caldwell in FY25, assuming that we'd be able to, or not assuming, but hoping to be able to add a new route out there, the Route 56. That request was removed in these numbers. So this is just to maintain the existing service levels. Yes.
Okay, and is there any correlation between why both counties did not fund as we requested? Is there a connection between counties not funding? I understand there's no connection between pick a city and pick a city, but the two counties both came up short. Is there any correlation between that answer, or just that's the case?
Mr. Chair, I think that's mostly just the case. I suppose if there's any insight into that, I think we have typically been a little challenged on the county side. And it might just be the fact that they're looking, they tend to look just at the unincorporated populations, which don't have a whole lot of trips or rides from the unincorporated areas. And that's part of the discussion that I think Elaine was referencing earlier. We're trying to highlight the fact that unincorporated or incorporated, actually a lot of the services that the county provides are going to be within the city. So the destinations that they're going to are within our jurisdiction. That's certainly true for Ada County. It's also true for Canyon County. So it's a little bit, we're trying to open the door a little bit to say that the benefits that we're providing to the county don't only accumulate in the unincorporated areas. So it's just been a little bit harder, I think, for us to make the argument to the counties as to why they should pay for things that are going on within the cities that they serve when we also requested the cities. But that's, again, the conversation that Elaine was mentioning earlier about how we talk to the county and the benefits we provide to them.
Yeah, I don't know about other cities, but I do know that Meridian is what I call checkerboarded. There are county-only places on virtually every street you drive in Meridian. You're there. It is not in any way draw a line around the city of Meridian and everything within that is city. Not any way it close.
That's true.
So in that thinking, the county people who are not incorporated into at least Meridian have bus service, in some cases going right by their front door if they wish to take advantage of it. So I think that's what you were referring to, Elaine, when in part of what you're trying to tell them about and explain to them.
And
go ahead.
yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's exactly what I've been talking about. In addition, you probably all know that every county in the state gets property tax support from every resident of the county, including every resident of every city that is within that county. And yet, historically, in Idaho, counties have made an assumption that their services are only for residents who don't reside in
Who are in unincorporated areas.
And so it's an interesting conundrum that's not confined to just transit. It's confined, it impacts a lot of other services as well. So it's a larger discussion that I don't suspect that I'm going to be able to solve, but at very least we can point out to them the services that we provide and how they benefit the services that the county provides, and how without the services we provide, many of the services they provide would be more difficult for them to actually provide access to the people who need them.
While we're on a roll here, Stephen, one other question or a couple of questions. One, is the FY25 committed column pretty much locked up, short of somebody amending a budget? Have the cities now locked up their budgets for the next?
Yes,
Fiscal year.
as far as I know, we're in the process now of, as I mentioned at the top, we're in the process now of sending out those cooperative agreements with each of the jurisdictions.
All right. And secondly, these numbers under the requested are under what I refer to as the new method. Elaine mentioned the name of it a moment ago. Remind me.
Cost allocation methodology.
Okay. Any thoughts about that methodology, which occurred about 2 years ago, maybe, as opposed to the way we used to request? Any?
Mr. Chair, I believe that there's another agenda item to talk about the cost allocation model, which we could
Okay.
start that now, or we could wait to take those comments then.
We can wait till then. Okay. Questions from anyone? Comments? Thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, just a
Teresa?
quick reminder for me. So is VRT on the same fiscal year budget, like as most of the cities and the counties? Okay,
Yes, our fiscal year also starts on October 1st,
so the federal. Okay,
runs through September 30th. That's also been a bit of a challenge for us because the way this budget process ends up happening, we often don't have signed cooperative agreements before our budget year starts. We're working hard this year to get as many of those signed before the budget year starts as possible, but it is kind of a challenge.
You're writing a budget while trying to figure out what your revenue might be.
Yes.
thanks.
Thoughts, questions, anyone?
If members of the RAC don't have anything else, I had just a question or discussion point. So we've been talking a lot about what the RAC can do and how the RAC can engage in all VRT processes. So I think funding is a major topic that we've all separately and collectively talked about. So I just want to throw it out there for consideration. Like what can this committee do to whether it's educate or advocate or participate in any of this funding stuff? And I wonder if now's a good time to talk about like the future and kind of what our future efforts might be.
I think so. Let me, before you do that, I would comment that many of you know that we also had a back and forth with the city of Nampa this year as they tried to determine how much they were going to fund. And as part of that, there was a second public hearing, and the commentary at that public hearing provided by members of the public, including Andrew, I think was an important factor in their final decision to fully fund the budget. So I would say there's recent evidence that advocacy does help in those kinds of decision processes.
Good point.
If I could add to that too, that's something that we try to get out to the RAC as soon as we get information. In a lot of cases, we don't get information as fast as we would like. But the minute something like that comes down, the RAC tends to be one of our first lines of like, hey, this is going on. We push it out to our writers, of course, but I think the way I view this council is a great arm for us to reach out into the community even further. So when we get that information, we try to get it to you as quick as we can.
So yeah, read those emails, and if there's something that you feel strong enough about or want to try to help with, and the timing works for your schedule, emails or in-person comments cannot hurt. Andrew? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
I would like to point out that had it not been for Jason Rose, by the way, thank you, Jason, I would have been stranded at that public hearing because they had it so late that bus riders couldn't really show up either without getting stranded. And I suspect a number of them were stranded there as well.
Actually, 2 of them left before they testified because they would have been stranded.
Okay, moving on to the next item, which is again is a Stephen Hunt item, the funding model changes. Stephen.
All right. So I think this is meant to be a continuation of the conversation we just started. We'll get to the questions that you were asking a second ago, Mr. Chair. So in this presentation, I'm going to go over how we do our current cost allocation and how it was done, and looking a little bit into the future about where we are headed. So cost allocation model, as we currently know it, was created in 2019. It was built off of a methodology that was established in 2002, when shortly after VRT was organized as a way to distribute our funding requests. I think the two things that I want to point out on this slide is, first of all of our funding requests, this is an expense-based approach, as opposed to a revenue-based approach. We talk about what our expenses are, and then we take those expenses and distribute them among our funding partners asking for funds. In the original 2002 arrangement, we had two different categories. There was what we called the regional assessment and then the service allocation. In 2019, we built on that to have more. We also added in a few other steps to formalize the process of kind of these three main steps of identifying what the local share is, categorizing those costs into either something like a regional assessment, service allocation, and then distributing those costs among our funding partners. But just one more slide on the original model. In the regional assessment, these were costs that were not related directly to service, and they were distributed among our funding partners based on the non-duplicated population. So I think this speaks to some of the ways that we had just historically interacted with the counties about not counting city populations within the counties, but just the unincorporated populations. And then for non-population partners like ACHD or any of the highway districts or the universities, we use negotiated rates to come up with the regional assessment. Service allocation was distributed according to miles and stops. And importantly, capital and maintenance reserves were not included in this original allocation methodology. The 2019 update was a pretty significant update, and it had three main steps to it. It built on the original model, but it had these three main steps of first identifying what the local share is. Again, because this is a cost or an expense-based model, we started with the total expense need, and then we identified what the local share is by subtracting out our federal and directly generated revenues. And then we categorized those costs across three different categories of the general assessment, which was similar to the original regional assessment, a special allocation for any special projects, and then service and capital. So we added capital explicitly into the cost allocation model in 2019. That's the categorization of costs. And then the last step is distributing those costs among our partners. And I'll speak a little bit to how that happened. But again, it was based on population and miles. So those three steps: identifying the local share, categorizing the costs, and then distributing costs to our funding partners. So to go into a little bit more detail on identifying the local share, again, we would start by summing all of our expenses by division and department, and then subtract out any federal and directly generated revenues, again, by division and department, so that we could identify how much we needed to request of our local partners. Then we would categorize those costs into a general assessment. And again, general assessment are those things that aren't related directly to service or capital. So you could think of this as some of the overhead costs or the shared costs like IT or finance or planning. And then special allocations. This would be any specific project that we would be working on a jurisdiction where they had maybe a particular interest, and we would be requesting funds specifically for that project, so that there was a category for special allocations. and then service and capital. I forget. Yeah. Okay. So in servicing, the general assessment is determined by, again, the non-duplicated population. So we carried forward that original assumption in the original model for partners with populations. For highway districts and colleges, we again use this negotiated rate to come up with their share of the general assessment. Special allocation is literally just that. We would work with an individual partner, talk about an interest that they have, and fund that within our request. I think
Eagle on demand.
is a great example of a special allocation. So that we didn't request any funds of any other partners for Eagle on Demand. That was a specific interest that the city had when we started that. That was categorized as a special allocation. Service and capital allocation, that's driven by miles of service in a jurisdiction. And it's cut up that way. You could think of it like a giant cookie cutter where we take all the routes of the system and we chop up those miles based on the jurisdictions that they serve. We had to make certain assumptions around that checkerboard approach that you were talking about, Walter. And we ended up breaking up the costs according to miles by jurisdiction in service and capital. So we would be doing the same thing for, say, based on where that capital was occurring and the services that use that capital asset, those costs get distributed according to miles of service. And then, here we go. I was ahead of myself, should have gone here. So what I just described is the distribution of costs, categorizing the costs into these three categories: general assessment, special, and service and capital. And then we distribute those costs among our funding partners according to population, service miles, and special projects. So let me jump back here real fast because I feel like this diagram does a reasonable job of describing those steps. That's the current model. And if we want to talk about that now, we can, or I can continue with the presentation. And
Any questions on this slide for Stephen? Okay, move ahead.
so as we look to the future, one of the things that we are trying to do is, I think, move from an expense-based model to a revenue-based model, meaning it would be helpful for us as we are looking to say, what can we do to start with the revenues that we can expect, rather than starting with expenses and then trying to get people to fill those expenses, which is our current model. So a revenue-based model, we have made some steps in that direction through what we call the local memorandum and MOU with jurisdictions to set some kind of floor to say, this is what we can expect from each jurisdiction going forward. This is the kind of thing we have with the city of Boise. It's not binding, but at least it helps with some of our revenue forecasts as we're trying to make longer term decisions about how much money we're going to have in the future. Having a revenue-based approach would help us with that. The other approach for a revenue-based model would be looking at some kind of dedicated funding, and that would require some legislative action. The benefits of a revenue or these changes is that it could provide greater stability. It really helps us do more meaningful planning, and it helps VRT become a reliable partner among the community. It's really hard we do everything we can, but you can appreciate that if all of our funding is dependent on local jurisdictions' annual budget appropriations, then it's hard for us to say what we're going to be doing in 5-10 years down the road. Many capital projects require that kind of lead time, especially if we're working with, say, ITD or other capital-oriented partners. Us being able to be a reliable partner, it's always a little bit challenging.
Andrew, did you have something?
Yes, I did. When it came to you mentioned legislative action, you guys know I'm on the Idaho Council on Developmental Disabilities as well, and I'm trying to push them towards a transit as one of their goals for the 5-year plan. And they tried it before and haven't had much luck, but I feel it worth noting that maybe if they had someone on the rack to advocate for um, that being part of their next 5-year plan, maybe that could help a little bit. In other words, I'll see what I can do.
Andrew, this is Elaine. I'm going to pop in here. You know, the rack is designed to serve us and the challenges that we face in providing service. And while we ask the rack to advocate occasionally, it's not primarily an advocacy group. Rather than have groups join the rack for advocacy purposes, as we move forward on a campaign for funding, I'm looking at putting together an advocacy-based group of nonprofits. So I think that would be a better place for them to play. Certainly, persons with developmental disabilities may need to be represented on RAC at some point, but I'd prefer that the council not be represented as an advocacy purpose. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, but my point was a rising tide raises all ships as well, if that makes sense.
Certainly. And as I said, I'm intent on putting together an advocacy group of nonprofits, but that's not the group that will work with us on service challenges and other challenges within our organization.
Noted.
Thanks.
Stephen?
And that is the extent of the presentation I prepared.
It's like Kyle, something to add.
I would just.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something into what Steven said. So I work on the cost allocation model all year round, and this year more than previous years, we were able to use these tools to identify the cost to these jurisdictions and got more questions than we ever have as budgets are getting tighter. So this was a very effective, it's shown its effect with having a model that's able to clearly identify these expenses and what it costs those jurisdictions. On the flip side, when we got back to jurisdictions, it almost became like menu items where they said, oh, well, now we know how much that particular service or route costs. We don't see the value in that. And in order to run these services as a whole, with having so many different partners that need to pay the portion to run that whole service, it does become quite challenging. But with having this model versus how we previously did it, we were able to clearly identify those a lot better than years past. So I just wanted to add that as a note.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. And Mr. Chairman, if I could add just a little more context again to Stephen's presentation. So as we move forward, one of the things I've learned in the last year and a half is that, as Cam just said, the cost allocation method is really valuable in identifying the costs that we're confident we can say should be attributed based on the assumptions that we've made to particular jurisdictions. And in doing that, then we can make a better case for the request that we're making of them and what they get out of it, because then we can show what ridership there is on those services that we've identified for them. The weakness, besides now seeing jurisdictions parsing what it is they want to pay for versus what they don't want to, and making that challenging to actually provide a network and a system that is integrated, is that there's a certain amount of subjectivity in the assumptions. Stephen alluded to those. We have made this objective assumption that enclaves in a city should be attributed to the city and not to the county. We've made the assumption that service miles and stops are the only factor we should look at in terms of the cost of service to a jurisdiction, and not the ridership at particular high volume stops, or the population served in particular areas, or the demographics of the population served and how that might impact their need for those services. Those are nuanced and difficult factors to put into our criteria. But as we worked through the methodology the last year, it was clear to me that we at least need to begin to think about those, because as we got numbers back out of running this criteria-based system, there were places where it didn't quite work. It didn't fit, right? Service at the village in Meridian is a really important service, and the methodology doesn't attribute any importance to it, for instance. Doesn't attribute the importance of connecting North Boise with the bench, doesn't attribute any importance to connecting residents in Boise to the airport that before now didn't have those connections. Doesn't take into account the need of the residents in parts of Garden City. So we're trying, as we work through these things this next year, to begin thinking about some of that criteria and figuring out if there's a logical, rational way that we can change some of the assumptions to take some of those things into account. I'm not asking any of you to be the genius that can help us figure that out, but any comments you have on how you think those kinds of assumptions and the way that they impact the criteria might be important would be, I think, valuable to us as we work through that.
I would think the more information you give the entities, the more it sets you up for questioning and criticism, where you would hope that it would set up somebody saying, well, we need to be putting more money into that because it's doing a good service, or it needs to be expanded, or this, that, and the other. The negative probably works quicker or easier for elected officials than does the positive. The city of Boise has certainly thrown a lot of money at VRT over the years. I don't mean thrown in a bad way, but they've really put more than their share in. A lot of it, I'm sure, had to do with a particular city councilwoman who is no longer there, but I'm glad to see that Boise continues to help and have us work toward creating better service for areas in the system. Stephen, anything else?
Mr. Chair, just open for conversation on this topic. Anything else, we'd be happy to answer.
Comments, questions? Yes, ma'am.
In general, I guess I'd ask a question of all of you. Does this seem like a fair way to get our costs? And if there are things in it that stand out to you as either better or worse in that regard, I'd welcome those comments. And then the second part of that question, do you have any ideas about better ways to allocate costs?
Okay, we will leave those out there as questions for you to think about. Again, as I will tell you at the end of the meeting, as always, we're constantly looking for input from members regarding future topics. So if someone has a light bulb go off later today or during the week thinking, yeah, I've got an idea, get a hold of myself, Mary Beth, Jason, and we'll be happy to explore it and see if we can enlarge it into a topic for a future meeting. Okay, thank you, Stephen. It seems to be the Stephen Hunt show today, which is just fine. Next item C is Stephen's going to talk about the Ada County Highway District Integrated 5-Year Work Plan. And there's been a little activity on that. This is a process they go through that a lot of us are involved in different organizations that have input into that. When we get to the end, sometimes I wonder how much input we really had, but we do it anyway. So, Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so this is just to talk about the Ada County's Highway District's 25 to 29 Integrated 5-Year Work Plan and VRT's comment letter on that draft plan. So just a quick review of the Integrated 5-Year Work Plan process at ACHD. In the winter, they begin soliciting input from the public and various agencies. VRT is one of those agencies, has been for the last 3 years. And they have done actually, I think, a really outstanding job in putting out more opportunity for the public to comment on their integrated 5-year work plan. So they get a lot of comments each year on that process. They draft that, they develop a draft of the integrated 5-year work plan in the late spring, early summer, and then prepare a final work plan for additional comment in the summer, which is actually out now. They have had the integrated 5-year work plan out since, I think, July, and next week it'll be in front of the commission for adoption. Last week,
To interrupt, this is a rolling 5-year plan. It is approved by the commission annually, and every year it is reviewed with things moving up and down it. Something that was, pick a number, 215 last year may jump up to number 3 to get done the next year because of various factors. Other things that are high on the list can fall down the list and be combined with other things. So it is a living animal, if you will, in terms of being worked on, planned, and they do give the cities, VRT, other entities input capability to it, and you put your best thoughts into it and you see what comes out in the end. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
no, that's very good. In that winter timeframe when they solicit input from each of the agencies in public, that all goes into a scoring rubric. And then based on those scores and other input, they and their budget, I mean, that's the other big factor there. They put together what that integrated 5-year work plan is going to look like. And it's also true that things can move up and down that year to year. And they will be approving the 25 to 29. Well, we expect they will be considering for approval the 25 to 29 integrated 5-year work plan next week. So what VRT has commented on, the main point that we made in this year's integrated 5-year work plan has focused on State Street. There are 5 projects on State Street where VRT has some plans to make improvements along that corridor at State and Glenwood, State Bloom / Plantation, the Marketplace, Willow, and Whitewater. Those are all locations that we have future projects, future concepts developed for those locations.
And those projects in general are what type of work?
So these are all improvements to, Mr. Chair, these are all improvements to the transit infrastructure that's there and the adjacent pedestrian and bike infrastructure. So that we're talking about sidewalks and shelters and benches, but also curb lines and drainage, because we have to know where that's at in order to know how the bus is going to get to and from those bus stops, which leads to our comments have been that ACHD has several projects that would impact those locations. There's the State Pierce Park to Collister. They have a project well, let me back up. State Street for the last, since 2011, has been a project that we have been coordinating with many with many partners to develop into a multimodal corridor. The vision is a 7-lane cross-section, at least from Whitewater to Glenwood, with multi-use paths on each side and lots of quality transit amenities along the corridor. Ada County Highway District has been going down the corridor at major intersections and widening out those intersections to the ultimate design, and we've participated in many of those projects. These projects that remain, the State and Bloom, Marketplace, Willow, Whitewater, and Glenwood, are projects that are in between those main intersections. And in order for us to move forward with those projects, we need to have a design of the roadway done so we know that the project can tie into that ultimate design. So this has been the dance that we've been doing with the Highway District to figure out how do we move forward with the design on those corridors so that we can put in the infrastructure that we would like to see there for existing and future riders while they're building their own design for the corridor as well.
And Stephen, how does ITD play into all this?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, ITD begins at Glenwood. So the one stop on here the one stop that is in the previous slide that's not on this one is State and Glenwood.
It begins going west
Excuse me. Yes.
from Glenwood.
Yes.
So anything east on State from Glenwood is all ACHD.
Yes.
Okay.
And just to make it more complicated, I mean, not really, but
Just to explain it better.
just to explain it better, yes. I think the actual jurisdictions are like half of the intersection. So Glenwood the State and Glenwood intersection has interests of ACHD, ITD, Garden City, and the city of Boise. So that one is complicated. And it is one that they've taken a couple swings at and haven't been able to finalize a design or a concept on. When I say they, I mean ITD took the lead on that most recently in developing a concept. But that's one of the 5 locations that isn't really on a planned project in the integrated 5-year work plan for ACHD. The other 4 fall under these projects of State Street between Pierce Park and Collister, State Street Collister to 36, and State Street 36 to 27th. And what those projects are is a design and construction of the ultimate future of State Street, which is that 7-lane cross section. What we have been asking of ACHD in our comment letter was if they could make each one of those projects designed within this integrated 5-year work plan. One of them falls in that State Collister to 36 has a design year of 2029, and we're asking that they also consider Pierce Park to Collister and 36 to 27th to all give them a design year so we can start working towards that and putting in the infrastructure that we would like to see at those I'll call interstitial locations. So again, that was our comment to ACHD, assign design years to each one of those projects so that we can continue to move forward on coordinating the transit components to the corridor. And to be fair, it's transit and non-motorized. So you can't have sidewalks or multi-use paths without knowing where the curb is. You can't have bus stops without knowing where the curb is. You can't have the curb known until you know what the drainage is. And so all of that stuff fits together. And that's what we're asking in our comments to ACHD to get done so that we can start picking that off. And I would stand for any questions.
David, you're smiling. There's got to be a question in that head somewhere. Not to call you out. Okay.
Give me a couple days. Stew
Fair
on it.
enough. Anyone with questions regarding the integrated 5-year moving, rolling, BEBA-like work plan.
I have
Yes,
a
ma'am.
question. So then, I was reading through all of this last night and got on the integrated 5-year work plan for ACHD, and it looks like it's just like you're saying in the letter. So then what is VRT going to do? Are you guys going to maybe testify next week at the hearing and ask the commission to assign a date for design, or what are you going to do moving forward? Are you just going to try next year, or what are the next steps?
Do plan on being, Mr. Chair, we do plan on being there on the 25th. I haven't talked to Elaine about specifically what we will be doing there. I mean, we've made our request, but Elaine, I don't know.
Who gets to go?
Stephen will be there. I won't be in town, so I can't be there. I wish I was. We will make our general request. Not surprisingly, some of our other partners are concerned that because there's a limited amount of money in the system, if ACHD were to move our priority up, it would move some of theirs down. And so what we've promised is that we'll reconvene the State Street executive team and the leadership team, which hasn't been convened for some number of years, have a discussion about a larger discussion about funding for State Street and whether or not we're at a point where they're willing to entertain federal funding for the whole corridor, which they've been unwilling to do to date because federal funding comes with certain strings and they weren't certain they wanted to go through all of those strings. But it occurs to us that if there's not enough funding in the system, we can bring an 80% federal share to it, that it's worth that discussion. So we want to put this point on the record and then start a discussion about how we move forward with it in a more concerted way so that as a region, we can decide if this is really important or not. And if it is, figure out a way to pay for it.
Federal funding through what program?
5339 probably, which is bus and bus facilities, but this corridor could also potentially be eligible for another RAISE grant. There's a capital improvement grant program, small and new starts or CIG in the FTA system that many regions use for bus rapid transit. It's a very complicated process to qualify for that. And it's a very competitive one, so I don't know if we'd qualify, but there are enough discretionary federal grant programs out there that I think we could at least attempt to qualify for it.
Other
Mr.
questions,
Chair,
comments?
I would also mention that just to provide some perspective, I think we have had, or for as long as ACHD's had an integrated 5-year work plan, I believe these projects have been on it without a design year. And so I think it's encouraging that at least one of them now has a design year. I think there's some momentum building to get this figured out. There are development pressures on the corridor that they need to know what are we going to be doing. And I think that's the reason that you see at least that one section having a design year is because they recognize that this is not something we can keep punting on. And so for a little glimmer of hope, I think there has been some good progress on getting this resolved. But it's not obviously fully there yet.
It's always next year, unfortunately. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so to that point, Walter, because this whole process starts all over again this fall and winter, where the municipalities and other agencies will make the request and residents are able to make a comment as far as what they would like. I mean, I think it would be really valuable for our transit riders along that corridor to comment on that integrated 5-year work plan in the fall, requesting that that project be given a date for a design. I think that's something that, we should push for. I mean, I go along that corridor and I can speak to how unsafe it is in some of those areas to move about that corridor in order to catch the bus. And then when you depart the bus, to be able to go to your home. So those are just my thoughts, I mean, it's the squeaky wheel, right? We talk about that. The squeaky wheel who's going to get fixed and get that project a date. Thank you.
Anyone else? Stephen, thank you. Next item is the FlexBus lease proposal, and Kate Dahl is going to explain the what and the why that is on here.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi. All right. So this morning, I just want to update you on what's going on with the FlixBus proposal. First off, this conversation, as you guys may know, VRT has been having conversations with Greyhound for over 5 years, since the Greyhound moved their facility out of downtown Boise. They've been contracted at Flying J, which is where their stop has been for the last 5 years. Their lease was up in June, and they, even before that, for the last year or so, they've been looking for an alternative location to go from Flying J. As part of those conversations from the last 5 years, VRT conducted an intercity connections study this spring to basically discuss the needs for a multimodal transit facility that would accommodate not only VRT's local operations, but the regional transit carriers. Not only was there Greyhound, there's Salt Lake City Express, Northwest Stage Lines, and now FlixBus. Most of
Those are all separate entities.
those are all separate entities. Yeah. And well, that's not completely true. So FlixBus is the largest intercity carrier in Europe. They recently moved to the United States, and during COVID, Greyhound lost ridership, so they purchased Greyhound. So now FlixBus owns Greyhound. Salt Lake City Express is a regional carrier that started on the eastern side of the state to make connections basically between the Salt Lake City Airport and Yellowstone, and serves eastern Idaho, and they've started to branch out as well into western Idaho and south all the way to Las Vegas, I believe. But they've recently purchased Northwest Stage Lines, and Northwest Stage Lines provides north-south service from Boise to Spokane. They also have kind of moved into the Northwest as well. So in the past, all of these, sorry, go ahead, Lane.
Well, but they still maintain separate names, at least for now.
Correct.
Whatever happened to Boise Winnemucca? I thought that was such a cool name.
They're also still around. They just provide charter services.
Okay.
Yeah. So in the past, all of these carriers have connected at the Boise airport, where passengers have been able to make exchanges, or at the Flying J as well. So we took a look at the Boise airport. As you know, the Boise airport is expanding, and they have a lot of construction, but essentially they're running out of curb space for ground transportation. And it looks like they're going to outgrow that in the next 5 to 7 years. So they don't necessarily have room at this point to accommodate all of these carriers. So one of the alternate locations we looked at in this study was just on the other side of I-84 at the Elder Street Park and Ride, which is owned by BSU, and they've used it as a park and ride to the campus, but that hasn't worked out as well. So they're sort of they're open to other ideas. And after going through the study and talking to all the stakeholders about this location, Elder Street Park and Ride seems to make really good long-term sense. It's close to the airport. It's on VRT's Route 3, Route 3 to the airport. And there's hotels and restaurants right around there for the riders that would be coming off of intercity connections. In addition to that, Boise BSU has found that a fair number of their students use intercity connections, intercity carriers to get to the campus or get to school and to holidays. So that works well. Of course, there's a lot of issues to work through. The price tag to build out a full multimodal facility there is, in the ballpark of 10 to 20 million. So that's really a long-term project for VRT. So something needed to happen within the short term. As we began these discussions with Flix, looking for a place where we talked a lot about Happy Day. That's a facility that VRT already has. There's a lobby. We have connections with our on-demand and inter-county routes there, and it's an underutilized facility. Obviously, the couple issues that arise with Happy Day is it's not very close to a direct on-ramp. It's 2 to 3 miles to the nearest on-ramp off of I-84, and there's really no hotels or restaurants within that close vicinity. However, it's ready to go as far as a stop. So we've been in negotiations with Flix since this spring, working on a lease price and location. So at this point, we've just provided them a license agreement to review and approve. It looks like at this point in negotiations, they would be leasing our lobby, they'd be leasing an office space, and then leasing curb space on the street where they would drop passengers. This diagram shows the circulation pattern at Happy Day. So currently, where the green lines are, this is where VRT bus service basically circulates around the facility. We have 3 security gates shown in red, which require transponders on our buses. After speaking with operations, it didn't make sense to provide transponders to Flixbus, and operations recommended that they stop on the street instead and then circulate around the public streets rather than through our facilities. However, stopping right here, there's already a bus stop pad there, so we can place some benches there, and then passengers can basically walk in front of the shop into the lobby.
Is the city of Caldwell, drop back one slide, are they okay with using those streets for the turnaround? Going up into that roundabout?
So at this
I'm
point,
not sure how they would say no, but have they been part of this?
We have a license agreement with.
yeah,
Okay. And the roundabout's large enough to turn the bus around
yes.
without backing up?
So Flixbus operates 365 days a year. As I said, they go from Portland to Salt Lake via Boise, and then they connect. So people can use Northwest Stage Lines to go to Spokane. They would essentially have 2 stops at Happy Day in the morning that are about 30 minutes to an hour apart, and then 2 stops in the evening that are the same span. Their latest drop off is about 9:30, 9:45 in the evening, which is past Happy Day's hours of operation. So one of the requirements, in addition to the lease.
Get rid of that on the screens. See the.
So they would be required to provide security during the hours of operation that they're stopping. The lease price would generate approximately $35,000 to $40,000 a year in revenue for VRT. This is revenue that we can use as a match to get federal grants in order to do the improvements to Happy Day Transit Center. Right now, Happy Day Transit Center needs a new roof, new HVAC, and new electrical. We have been unable to make those improvements because our Canyon County partners have been unable to provide that local match to date. So this will be a great solution for VRT to start making headway on improving that facility. Not only that, it will help activate the facility. We have some riders circulating through there now with the on-demand and routes 40 and 42, but having more passengers coming through there will be more riders on our bus service. According to Flix, most of the passengers are transferring, so there isn't that many folks that will be there, such as in like a park and ride situation or being dropped off, but there will be a handful of people that Happy Day will be the start and end of their trip. That's all I had, unless you had any additional questions.
I asked that this be put on the agenda in order to bring you up to date on a larger presentation that Kate did to the executive board a month or two ago. Want to make you aware of it, that we'll be getting more use out of Happy Day. And we did try, as Andrew mentioned earlier, to hold this meeting at Happy Day because I've been out there and looked at it, but I don't know if all of you have. And there's some IT challenges with being able to hold a meeting out there, and we're working on those, and once we get those worked out, we'll hold a meeting out there in the future so you can see what we're talking about. Any questions or comments regarding this? Andrew?
The reason I was needing to be online today was actually because of the Happy Day Transit. I was going to use on demand to get to the meeting that I thought was there. That was the mix up. So if we're going to hold it and mention that we're going to hold it earlier, then I think it needs to be made solid then, so that people like me who use Beyond Access are able to get rides to and from within enough time, if that's okay.
Yeah, I agree. I understand tell me about it early enough that I can make some arrangements for it. What I don't understand, Andrew, is how you even knew we were thinking about it. We never did solidify it. We discussed it, and it turned out it couldn't be done. So anyway, glad you're with us online today. Sorry we couldn't be out at Happy Day, but we'll work on it and let everybody know in advance when we're going to do it. Anyone else?
Probably personal error, my bad.
Yes, ma'am, Teresa.
So when will the Flix service then be going to Happy Day at this point?
Well, we've just given them the copy of the lease agreement, so they're reviewing. It's actually a license agreement. They're reviewing the license agreement, and as soon as they sign that and they get to install the security cameras, then they can do the drop off and pickups. I would expect that's probably still another month out at least.
Okay.
Within the next month or two.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I was just thinking that'd be a good thing to make sure kind of some of the people in the city and in that area know that that's going to start dropping off and picking people up in that area, just so they know what's going on.
We'll do outreach to our neighbors as we do this. The city of Caldwell obviously already knows. Part of the lease agreement includes a clause that they're required to not leave any passengers stranded overnight, and that if they do, we can terminate the lease. So
Okay.
we know that has been an issue at Flying J, and we're pretty confident that we've got terms in the agreement that won't allow that require them to act like an airline. If they leave somebody stranded, they have to provide them with a motel room.
Okay, great.
Kate, once this starts, what happens to Flying J in the airport?
Their lease with Flying J was expired June 1st. So at this
They will no
point,
longer use Flying J.
that's correct. So for
What
the
about the
last
airport?
couple of months, they have another stop at Town Square Mall, on the west side near Men's Warehouse. So at this point, they've been dropping all of their passengers there, and then they just have a ticketing agent with a cell phone standing on the curb.
So they're not using Flying J at this moment. They've already quit.
Correct.
They still use the airport.
No, they do not go to the airport. They only go to Town Square Mall.
Okay, what's the name of the bus that goes to McCall that picks up at the airport?
Northwest Stage Lines.
And will they continue the airport or will they only use Happy Day?
So Northwest Stage Lines will stay at the airport. There was discussion that maybe Northwest Stage Line and Salt Lake City Express would come to Happy Day as well, so they could make their transfers there, but they're not doing that. They're making the transfers at Town Square Mall and at the airport.
And
they'll continue to do that.
And so they'll have two stops, Town Square Mall and Happy Day.
Correct.
And then the exchange between those lines will be done at the mall.
Correct.
Okay. I think I
For
understand.
now, we're excited about the possibility that if the other carriers see how this site can work, because it has a lobby, it has bathrooms, it has facilities for the riders that they don't have today, that they may also be interested in using it. Part of that will depend on whether we can figure out the circulation so that they have easier on-off access to the freeway, which is a little bit difficult today.
Well, keep another lease available with a blank as to who you're going to put on it. We'll get that HVAC done over there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair, Sam had a comment.
Yes, Sam. Okay, I don't. I'm looking at.
Sam, did you want to comment out loud about?
Yeah,
your-
I love this utilization and partnership. I love that it brings revenue
Sorry.
to. Yeah. Oh, good.
No, sorry. Yes, I love that this is a great partnership and a great utilization of that space. I know there's been talk for years of how to better utilize it. I think it's great that it brings in revenue and allows for more transportation, interstate transportation on this end of the valley. So I think that's a really, really great service to bring to Canyon County. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item. Stephen, we've been keeping your seat warm for you over there. Welcome back. There's been some thinking and changing about supplemental services by VRT, and Stephen's going to explain those.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not have a presentation for this one, but I will just be speaking to pages 17 and 19 in your packet. So as you know, VRT has developed a program of supplemental service for the last couple of years, and we presented to the board earlier this month as to what our planned supplemental services will be for FY25, and those are listed in. And they include Tree Fort, which is a program that we've done for the last several years, providing service to the main stage and other venues at Tree Fort. This is
A really big deal, and people love it.
yes, it is. It includes bands on the bus. It's been popular each year. We've done that. Actually, just this last weekend, we completed the Hyde Park Street Fair. So this was using an existing route, Route 16, to operate between downtown Boise and Hill Road, serving stops on 15th adjacent to the Hyde Park Street Fair. We don't have final numbers for that yet, but It was well used from what I could see. I was out there in the morning. And then also in the packet is a mention of Boise State football games. We were going to be providing additional service to the Route 2 Broadway and 29 Overland. We had been planning on doing that, but we have since decided that we will not do any supplemental service related to Boise State football games this year. We're working with our partners at Boise State and other downtown partners to make sure that when we do that kind of supplemental service, it'll be well coordinated and received. So that one we put on hold. And then the other events include a variety of community parades, including another one that was also this past weekend, the Boise Pride Parade, but also the Veterans Day Parade, the Holiday Parade, Dairy Days here in Meridian, Nampa Parade. America is one that we haven't done in the past, but are looking forward to doing in this coming year. The purpose of our supplemental services, again, is to give people an opportunity to see what Valley Regional Transit services are like, help train them how to use fixed route service. It was enlightening to be part of the Hyde Park shuttle. The supplemental service on Route 16, because it required people to park their cars and walk to a bus stop and wait at a bus stop and pull a cord when they got on the bus. So all these things that we kind of take for granted on how to use service, we were explicitly trying to provide people the opportunity to do that in these supplemental services because we recognize that this takes a little bit of time, and exposure we feel like is one of our best marketing tools. So we look for these kinds of supplemental service opportunities, and I guess that's all I wanted to share on that.
And Mr. Chairman, we
Yes, ma'am.
made a decision not to move forward with Boise State football games this year. Instead, to use this year to work with the partners to ensure that if and when we do this, it's well coordinated with whatever other services there are around the games. There was a little bit of concern that we needed a little more time to make sure that that was going to work. As you can see, a lot of the budget was going to be allocated toward that. We're having a meeting next week, both to review the Hyde Park service, which by all accounts was very successful this year, and also begin exploring doing some late night service in downtown Boise during the holiday season to begin serving the special events that they have during that season with just regular extensions of regular routes. Again, we're trying to move away from particular shuttles. We'll continue to do Treatfort, and there may be others that we will do in the future, and instead try to move toward extended service and more frequency on existing routes. That's what we did with Hyde Park. We had more frequent buses, and then we ran them later in the night on Friday and ran them all day Saturday when we don't typically have Saturday service on that route. We think the same can be done with the 3, the 7, and the 9 into downtown Boise beyond 9:30, which is when we typically end service, and potentially on Friday and Saturday nights, running all the way till 12:30, so that people can get down into Boise and out without having to take a car, enjoy some of the libations that they might without having to worry about driving.
And Stephen, I think you make a good point. There, in my mind, there are several reasons why people don't ride the bus. Y'all know all this, but just to state them, one of them is like going to Vegas and wanting to play at the craps table, but not dare going because you don't have a clue what's going on. You know, it'd be really good to go over there and lose some of my money, but I wouldn't even understand why I lost it. I think bus riding can be a little bit like that. Number one, I've got to know where it is. I've got to know when it is, and then I've got to know how to do it. And if you can expose people to the how to do it part, just because, hey, I want to go to Hyde Park or whatever it happens to be, Treeford or whatever, and my God, the parking's horrible and whatever, but I see, I can catch a bus. Then they get exposed to it. And I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I was surprised. Actually, every time I do this, I'm surprised at the barriers that people have. Like, so we had worked with Hyde Park to identify a parking space at the Boise School District offices there on Fort. We have a stop that's literally across the street. And so we were encouraging people to park in the parking lot at Fort and then walk across the street to the bus stop. And I mean, if you stood there, people would be like, where do I catch the bus? And so simple things like recognizing the bus stop, knowing that you've got to walk to it, and then waiting for the bus there and then riding it. So it just takes a little bit of practice. And I think people, and then actually on the return trip, knowing that you cross the street to catch the bus going in the opposite direction, are just simple things that you learn only by using it.
People like Mary Beth that do it all the time
Don't even
think about, and others think, my God, I have no idea. I'll end up going to Garden City and not meaning to.
Yep. And then, when I get off the bus stop, maybe my destination, like the Camel's Back Park is 2 blocks away. So you just have right there. So there's a little bit of kind of wayfinding and trip planning that people just maybe aren't as familiar doing if they're only ever jumping in their car, driving exactly to the place that they're going to, walking and getting out and walking to the location. So that's really the main purpose behind the supplemental. Well, it's one of the main purposes behind the supplemental service, is to provide people the opportunity to go to something that they're committed to going to, overcoming some of those initial barriers so that they can then do that on a regular basis for other kinds of trips.
Okay, any questions? Yes, ma'am. Teresa.
I'm just kind of curious, like for deciding the supplemental service for the events, is that dependent on maybe someone making, like organizers making a request, or is there kind of a specific decision tree that you guys have for doing that? Or is it kind of just dependent on you all seeing, I know this event's going on, this would be a good one to see if they want the supplemental service?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think it's a little bit more like the latter, what you just described, of us trying to find opportunities where we know that there is some kind of transportation constraints, and where we have existing service that we can use. So like, we keep coming back to the Hyde Park one just because that was done this last weekend and because it fits really well with an existing service that we just add trips to. And so those are some of and that we can do it outside of the regular fixed route service. So we have to do all these in a way that doesn't impact our regular services. And so, yeah, we tend to look for those opportunities kind of internally. And then if we want to approach the event organizers, we can do that. But yeah.
And we do now have a supplemental services policy, and in that policy, it outlines that both we look for those internally and we welcome partners coming to us with ideas that we'll consider. We're organizing now that we have the policy, an internal supplemental services team that will both have a Teams channel so we can communicate regularly, but also meet on some regular basis. So we can share information about folks that come to us with ideas or ideas that we have.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chair, kind of just my other thought was your question earlier about the cost allocation. Like if there's some way to figure in, like mention the village, like, okay, they have special events, X number of days. So maybe somehow try to use that calculation, or like if the village has like the economic benefit of it, that you could kind of use that in the cost allocation.
And we're also trying this memo, even though we listed Boise State, and now we're backing away from that, was an attempt to ensure that we're not just doing these on the spur of the moment. We're considering them, planning for them, letting the board know what it is we're doing so that folks can both be more aware so that they can help people get on them and learn how to use our services, but also be confident that the pilot money that they've provided for these services is being well used.
I might add to that point. While we don't use necessarily the cost allocation model, to determine where we're going. It's a similar approach where we know we have, some service in Nampa, so we want to make sure we're represented in Nampa. So we're looking at the Veterans Parade there. The bulk of our service obviously mean Boise, and so some of our event participation reflects that. So I wouldn't say quite as dialed in and formulaic as the allocation model, but it's a similar idea. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
And I think another piece of that is that we have the budget every year for supplemental services. One of our goals is to identify ones that we can support ongoing with generated revenue through advertising or whatever it may be, that we can move out of supplemental services and move into regular services. Once we do that, then we can use that directly generated revenue to run it and not use the local revenue that we have in this budget.
Andrew, 1 second. Stephen, given that you're doing like Hyde Park on an existing route and just adding buses and extending times during that event, were you charging people for that ride?
For Mr. Chair, for the Hyde Park example, we did not charge fare for any of the supplemental trips. The regular service.
If it was the regular bus, regular schedule, you did.
We did. Mm-hmm.
But if you had added a bus in the middle, that was a freebie.
That's correct.
Or after normal hours were free.
That's correct.
Is that confusing?
It
probably a detail we don't need to go into right now, but it's just a thought to me. If I understand I can take a bus to do the Hyde Park thing and go down there.
In this case, maybe the only confusion would have been those folks who tried to go to Hyde Park early on Friday while we were still running regular service. All the rest of it was additional service and was without fare. The other thing we've talked about is if it's a ticketed event, that we would allow the rider to show their ticket. And if they have a ticket, then they're allowed to ride for free. Otherwise, it's still a fare to ride that.
There you go. Andrew.
So my immediate thought for this type of service would be Nampa City Council or any city councils. Is there a way to make that a supplemental service so that people can testify and not have to leave early because, well, they'd be stranded?
Probably too complicated, and the hours wouldn't work on the buses. Most of those meetings are night meetings. I think it would be a bridge too far. Try to do this for something like that. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I would add some of the things that I've been thinking a lot about regarding supplemental service is what we need to do to support and promote that. So it's not only promotion, like big promotion from our channels and from our partner channels, but also presence on the ground. If there's park and rides, really good signage. So there's quite a lot that goes into standing some of the stuff up. And so for that reason, we're trying to be a little more selective on how often we do this. We have a handful of events. We'll do that a few times a year. And I think we're kind of we're getting a process going and we're getting more familiar with what it takes. But with frequency of something like a city council meeting, for that, we would more just promote existing service to the extent that we can for now, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
So Elaine, that holiday service, extending those hours on the 379, is that what you said? Are you shooting for this year about that?
Potentially, we've begun discussions. We don't know if we can get it fully planned for this year, but if we can, we may. We were about ready to do services for Boise State games, so we can pivot much of that effort toward this pretty easily. If not, certainly by next spring, we would try to lean into that.
Well, I would say I love that idea because people would be catching the bus in their neighborhood. Because one of the things that people will say, I don't take the bus because if I go out to eat and I go to a movie, by the time it's over, the bus isn't running. So to Stephen's point, as far as people finding where to catch the bus in their neighborhood, what side of the street to catch it, incoming or outgoing. I love that idea during the holiday season. And to Teresa's point too, with the village, they have lots of events happening. And that would be a great opportunity in my neighborhood. Where do I go to catch the bus? And then how do I get back home? That's a genius idea.
We frankly had not thought of either the 30 or the 45 in doing some events during the holiday season to the village as well, but it's a great idea.
Well, if you're going to do Christmas, you better get on it, because I heard this morning on the news that the Christmas sales are fixing to hit any day now. So somebody thought we were going to have Halloween first, but maybe not. Stephen, thank you very much. Jason Rose, can I drop a question out of the blue on you?
Of course.
Any thoughts, quick comments on the changes that were made, was it June 1, and how it's going?
Ooh, I would actually defer to Stephen on that one, probably. Or operations.
Well, since it is the Stephen Hunt Show, and nothing, no big details, but just, you know.
Sure. So as you all know, in June, we initiated the largest service change that we've done in 20 plus years. We took there's a couple of things that are outstanding. So I'm maybe going to start with things that are some lessons learned. Is we're still working on getting the temporary signs, permanent signs. So you'll still notice those out there. And we're working with FTA to get those approved and done. I think we'll see better reception when we have physical signs, because I've been hearing about that from people, like what's going on with all the temporary signs still. So that's something that's on our mind, and we're working to get that complete. We also went through a series of timing tweaks, both in August, late July, and then again in September. We tweaked some times, and that was because we knew going into it that we had made some assumptions about timing, and we wanted to be able to pivot as quick as we could if we ran into some issues. And so there were some timing issues that we had on the 7 and 29 and the 5, and those we addressed in July and then again in September. So just over Labor Day weekend, we had the final changes, tweaks, I would call them, to the service change, so that we can have more reliable service on all of our routes. As it relates to how people have been receiving them, there are, I think, a number of significant wins. There's quite a bit of growth on the 7, where we added 15-minute service in the peak period. We've seen ridership respond to that well. We've seen ridership really respond well to the change to Route 45, which is providing more consistent service from Boise to Meridian to Nampa. I should have Alyssa on to tell me, but I think it's in the neighborhood of 200% increase in ridership on the 45, which, we had a low base to start from, but it's significant what we're seeing on the Route 45. And I think there's a lot of room to grow there with a couple of other pretty quick connections from kind of the central bench or central Boise area into downtown, and between Meridian and Nampa and Meridian and Boise. So we're looking at how we build out the rest of our route reach. It's a term that Jason has been using to get people more familiar with the service changes. So that's been another a big win. We've seen growth on, I'm trying to think which other routes, the 29.
Steven,
Yeah.
I am on the line and I do have those numbers if you want me to pull those up for you.
Sure. If you wanted to just be prepared to say what the percent change is on the 40. I think we've seen some growth on the Route 40, the 45, the 42. So those inter-county changes, I think have been pretty well received. The 29 has had quite a bit of growth because it was picking up some of the riders on the 6. And the 7. And yes, and it now serves downtown. So those are, and the 24 is a new route. I think compared to the 8, it's pretty comparable, but there's a lot. That's the route that goes to a new route, all day service that goes to the village, connecting Town Square Mall and the village. So those are some of our wins. There are certainly some routes that we had projected to have higher ridership, which we haven't seen yet. And that's going to come from.
It's early.
It's early, yeah. And we're going to be kicking off a route reach, as we talked about a second ago, to get people more familiar with the bigger changes. But Alyssa, if you want to read off those percent changes on the various routes that we mentioned a minute ago.
Yes, of course. So looking over our changes year to date or month to date over the previous year, in July, the Route 4 saw a 6.45% increase over July of the previous year. The 7 is up 14%. The 16 has also grown by 48%. The 24, we're comparing it to the 8, is up 52%. The 29 has grown by 46%, almost 47. The 40 is up just a little bit, just under 1%, but the 42 grew by 45%, and the 45 grew by 188% over July of last year.
So it's far from oh my God, what did we do? It's really looking good.
It's looking good. I would be remiss to say though, our ridership did go down overall system-wide with the change, and we're going to work on getting that back up with promoting those other routes. So that's one of the things that's difficult with a full system change is you'll see positives and negatives. And right now we will be promoting the changes to see that ridership growth that we forecasted and planned for.
Okay, well, and I appreciate it. I just dropped this on y'all as watching the clock, not wanting to waste any time that people have allocated to the meeting. I thought I'd try to use a little bit of it more up and get them some more information. So thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the list of agenda items. Elaine, can I drop one on you?
Sure.
Paula tells me that she's just excited as the dickens to know you're in town for the moment. Not everything you're done and doing, but highlights. You went and saw a Senate committee, I heard.
I did.
How are those folks?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, it's been quite a year already. Many of you know I got a nomination by President Biden to join the Amtrak board, and the Senate Commerce Committee recently held a hearing for myself and 3 other nominees last Wednesday in Washington, D.C. I mostly got some softball questions about how I was going to be able to help bring service to the West. I think clearly the reason I was chosen is that the Senate is very interested in having a Western representative so that the West may in fact get some enhanced intercity passenger rail service on the Amtrak long distance system. So the process from here on out is that the Senate committee has until tomorrow to get written questions to us, and then we have a week to get written responses back. Given that they'll recess very quickly after that, it's likely that they'll mark up or vote on the recommendation to the full Senate sometime after the election. They'll take a recess during October during election season. And once that recommendation is made, then it will be up to the majority leader, the pro tem Senator Schumer, to get a hearing scheduled or a vote scheduled. Given all the votes they take at the end of the year, I've heard it's likely I won't hear that it's on the agenda until it's already voted on. And it might be 3 o'clock in the morning when they actually take that vote. So who knows? But it is looking potentially positive that they will indeed act before this Congress is adjourned. And that would be best, because otherwise you have to go through the whole process again if that doesn't happen. So on that front, very exciting. I'll be attending the Northwest Passenger Rail Working Group Summit in Spokane in about 3 weeks. I'll also be attending the Public Transportation Summit that ITD hosts every year next week in Coeur d'Alene. Jason Rose and Leslie are also going to that. Yesterday, I was in Blaine County at a meeting of the Resort Cities Coalition talking about how those cities could be better served by transit. And I've been meeting regularly with a number of legislators to talk about a more stable funding source. So we don't have anything yet written, a lot of ideas on the table, and everyone that I've talked to so far has been open to the fact that we do need to do something, that Idaho is at a point in its history where probably can't just continue to muddle through like we have been. So I think that's all really exciting news. I told Paula when I took this job that there would come a time that I would get too busy, and it was up to her to tell me when that time hit, and she just did. So I'll have to, from here on out, I'll be working to manage that a little bit better. But that's how I've always worked, and I've never that's never been a reason that I haven't gotten things done. So I'm actually very excited. I think things are moving along. I think there's been some what I would call sort of transparency moments in the process of what transit is and how it's funded this year, with the challenges that we've seen with some of our funding partners. And I happen to think that's a good thing, because if there's no recognition that there's a challenge, then there's not going to be any action to do anything about it. So while it has been, I know, challenging for everyone, including our riders, that's probably the part that hurts most, is some of the riders who are have been hurt, especially by the discontinuation of service. In the end, I think this brings attention to the fact that there is a high desire to have better public transportation in the state of Idaho. And I think that we're at a moment when maybe we can actually do something about that. So all in all, very exciting and fun, continues to be fun. And I would tell all of you, if there's things that I'm not doing that you think would be helpful, let me know what those are. If there's ways I can communicate better with you or your constituent groups, let me know what that is. I or any of the staff, we have great outreach staff. If there's a better way to have this discussion about funding, Andrew, I recognize you're anxious about this and you want to move, and we do need to. But I hope that we can do it in a way that brings people along together. So that's what I've been trying. But if you have any ideas about how to do that, let me know what those are, because to me, that's the goal. I envision a system that actually really serves the people of this valley in a way that we don't have today, because we just don't have enough funding to do that. And I know that the need's out there, and I know that people are beginning to recognize that. So I'm confident that we will be able to act on it, but it's going to be a lot of work.
Thank you, ma'am. And to follow up on a comment that Elaine just made, speaking of staff, there are other staff reports in your packet. I encourage you, if you have not had time, to please keep it out where you'll see it and take time to read those. Bring you up to date on operations, finance, IT, and other things. Anyone have anything else?
Last note, we have the next RAC meeting, November 19th. It's listed here in the Meridian boardroom, but we're going to try to get that into Happy Day. Just want to make a note because it is in the agenda. So we'll be sure to send out information as soon as we have it. Trying to get the tech stood up there.
But Andrew, don't plan on Happy Day until you're told we're going to Happy Day. I see your hand up. What do you got, Guy?
Thank you. Elaine, I actually had an op-ed that I was planning on if I had, or that op-ed I showed you a couple months ago. I sent it to Jason and he said he likes the wording in it. I was thinking it might be a good idea to send it out to some newspapers, possibly like the Caldwell Perspective specifically, or smaller papers that people get. Is that a possibility for helping get awareness for public transit in Canyon County?
I can speak to that, Andrew. And we kind of talked about this, but I would recommend, I mean, overall op-eds are a great opportunity to get the word out for sure. And I think that's a really good way to approach things from the RAC's perspective. I think it's one thing that we always appreciate is having the RAC kind of speak out on the issues that you all see. Mary Beth, I think, drafted one, was that a year ago, maybe? Yeah, it was a great op-ed. I would say we always want to run that through the RAC though. So I would always clear it through Walter and Mary Beth. If we're going to have anything signed off by the RAC and reference the RAC, it would, I think last time we had everyone kind of sign and approve. So I would suggest going that direction for sure.
So Andrew, I think what Jason is saying is, you are always free to put in an op-ed under your own name, but if you want to identify yourself with the RAC, we would ask that you let the rest of the RAC members see what you've written and sign off on it. But certainly if you don't want to go through that process and you're ready to send it, just send it under your name without identifying.
Well, I also find it as a possibly good opportunity to, I'm a big fan of people, if they have something specific they wanted VRT to know about, I'd like to put my RAC email in it as well, if that's possible. So I can add Mary Beth and Walter to it.
So again, I would say you're always free to solicit comments back to yourself. Personally, we have to be very careful about advocacy and soliciting comments as an organization. So I would hesitate to have an official VRT email listed in an op-ed, even if it came from the RAC.
In other words, just saying that I'm on the RAC and giving my email if anyone had any suggestions in the public.
Yeah, I think
we'll work with you, Andrew.
Yeah, I think again, if there's any affiliation with the RAC, we'll want to run it through the RAC.
Okay, I'll send that to anyone who wants it then too.
Well, Andrew, will you send it to Walter, Mary Beth, and copy me, and then we'll kind of route it through that way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else, anyone? Would we entertain a motion to adjourn?
This is
So
Terry
moved.
Lindenberg. I will.
I heard Terry for a motion. Would we have a second?
I
Seconds
second.
by Sam.
Oh,
Andrew beat you. Motion is second, non-debatable. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Anybody that wants to stay is welcome to do so. We're out of here. Thank you all.
Thank you.